She was washing the dishes, singing, unaware the millionaire was listening. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. At the Smith estate, nestled on a quiet stretch of countryside just outside Charleston, South Carolina, where the walls displayed modern artwork and the air was usually filled with nothing but the soft hush of automated doors, an unexpected sound drifted out of the kitchen that afternoon. It wasn't the clatter of pans or the delicate chime of crystal glasses. It was a woman's voice, gentle, in tune, almost mesmerizing. She sang an old folk song, something about longing and rivers, with the kind of ease that turned words into warmth. Alex Smith, who had returned from a meeting earlier than planned, paused at the kitchen doorway and stood completely still. The man known for quick decisions, direct words, and meticulously arranged spaces found himself unable to move. On the other side, a woman was washing glasses with calm, practiced hands, her hair pulled up into a practical bun and her bare feet resting on the cool tile floor. She was so immersed in the melody that she hadn't even noticed she was no longer alone. That kitchen didn't belong to her. Not officially, at least. Emma Wilson had been called in last minute to cover a shift, due to a scheduling mix-up between housekeeping agencies. From what little she'd overheard, the estate belonged to one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, but when she arrived, there was no sign of him. Just a personal assistant who gave her a quick rundown of instructions before vanishing, behind a door marked "Meeting in Progress." Since then, Emma had stayed focused on the requested meal, a savory herb tart, homemade bread, and a warm banana and honey dessert passed down from her grandmother. It was her quiet way of saying, "Thank you for the opportunity," an opportunity that had arrived when she needed it most. The rent was overdue, her sister's medication was running low, and what little savings she had left had gone to medical bills. Alex Smith wasn't the kind of man who was easily charmed. A widower for over 5 years and CEO of a luxury real estate group, he spent more time buried in contracts than engaged with people. His house, designed with sharp lines and imported furniture, functioned more as a showroom than a home. The staff avoided eye contact. The hallways were spotless, the floors muted by thick, expensive rugs. In the absence of human noise, Alex found company in routine, financial reports, backlogged emails, silence. But this afternoon felt different. Emma's voice, floating through the air like it cracked open some invisible seam in the stiff atmosphere of the house, disarmed him in a way he didn't understand. He stepped forward quietly, just enough to be seen. Emma turned when she caught his reflection in the polished metal of a pot. Her song faltered mid-note, and she quickly dried her hands on her apron, stepping back slightly. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't know you were home. I was just finishing up." Her tone was respectful but not fearful. Alex lifted a hand as if asking her not to stop what she was doing. "Keep going. Your voice fits with the smell of that tart. It's comforting." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd said out loud in ages. Emma looked slightly embarrassed but offered a small smile in return. She turned back toward the oven, trying to refocus. "You look tired. Would you like some coffee?" Alex hesitated before answering. "I haven't slept well in weeks. That song of yours, it reminded me of something good, something old." The honesty in his voice seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. In that moment, the formality between them quietly shifted. The meal was served right there in the kitchen. No fuss. Emma placed 2 plates on the small wooden table and served a warm slice of tart. Alex sat down across from her, as if that simple, domestic space were neutral ground. Afternoon light streamed in from the side window, catching the tired lines around his eyes and the soft glow of her skin. They didn't talk much, but just enough for him to realize this woman had far more to her than any resume could show. "My grandmother used to say food without a story is like music without lyrics," Emma shared as she sliced the tart. "She taught me to sing while I cooked, said things made with your voice always taste better." Alex listened quietly. There was something poetic in the way she spoke, but it didn't feel forced. It was genuine. It was real. When the meal ended, he thanked her. "That was one of the best meals I've had in months." And then he left, almost as if he were afraid that staying longer might undo something he didn't yet understand. A few days later, as Emma was tidying up the kitchen in the morning, the phone rang. It was the agency. A clipped, impersonal voice said, "Miss Wilson, there's been an error. You were assigned to Mr. Smith's estate by mistake. We didn't catch it until now. The position was intended for a different client, Dr. Smith, unrelated. We apologize and are correcting the issue." Emma felt her stomach sink. "What am I supposed to do? I've already planned my finances around this job." On the other end, there was a brief pause. "When we inform Mr. Smith of the mistake, he asked that you remain until further notice." That was unexpected. Men like him didn't bother prolonging small matters. Emma hung up and stood in place for several moments, staring at the marble countertop and the still warm oven. A decision would have to be made. That much was clear, but not just yet. Morning light poured gently over the garden, filtered through the high canopy of southern oak trees. Emma was setting the breakfast table when she caught sight of Alex walking outside, phone pressed to his ear. She hadn't expected him to be up so early. His pace was slow, shoulders tense, forehead drawn. When he ended the call, he stood there for a moment, staring at the lawn ahead, as if something hidden beneath the grass demanded his full attention. Then he turned and disappeared back inside, unaware that someone had been watching from the other side of the window. Emma looked away quickly. She had no intention of getting drawn into her employer's world. Just being there already felt like crossing a line. She reminded herself that her time in the house was temporary, and any distraction could cost more than she could afford. The service gate intercom buzzed around 9. Emma answered, and the voice on the other end made her pause. "It's me," said Elodie, her tone wavering between exhaustion and anxiety. "I'm sorry to show up like this. I just really needed to see you." Emma didn't ask questions. She unlocked the gate and hurried to meet her sister. Elodie stepped in through the side door, swallowed inside a coat too thin for the season. Her hair was messily pinned up, and her dark eyes seemed even deeper set than the week before. "They're hiding in the mirrors, Emma. They talk to me through objects, the television too." Emma didn't respond. She took her sister's hand and guided her to the back pergola, where there was some shade and quiet. They sat on a wooden bench, and Emma held Elodie's fingers in hers, speaking softly, trying to steady what little calm remained. It was one of the hard days. She could tell by the repeated phrases and the way her sister's eyes moved too fast, unable to land. They stayed there for a while until footsteps approached along the side of the garden. It was Alex. He wasn't rushing, but his gaze was focused. As he rounded the corner and saw the two of them on the bench, he froze for a moment. The scene didn't match anything else in the house. Two women huddled close, one whispering while the other sat with her eyes shut, like she was trying to block the world out. He didn't recognize the visitor. His brow furrowed slightly, and he stepped forward, stopping a few feet away. "Emma?" His voice was calm, but held an unspoken question. She stood immediately. "Mr. Smith, I'm sorry. I should have told you. This is my sister. She's going through something difficult, and I didn't want to leave her alone today." Alex looked at Elodie for a few seconds, then back at Emma. "You should have told me. I didn't know if it was appropriate. I just thought she shouldn't be by herself." He gave a small nod, said nothing else, and walked away. That night, Emma served dinner more carefully than usual. She chose the simpler cutlery, left some of the lights off in the dining room, and avoided anything that felt too formal. Alex sat at the table as he normally did, but spent several minutes just staring at the plate, not touching the food. Emma glanced at him now and then, unsure if she should say something or keep her professional distance. Then, while trying to replace the wine carafe, her fingers slipped. A glass fell, shattering on the floor, the wine spreading like ink across the white tablecloth. She crouched down quickly, hands trembling as she picked up the shards. "I'm sorry, sir. That was careless." Alex stood, grabbed a cloth from the counter and handed it to her. "Some stains come out with cold water, some don't." He said it without sarcasm, more like someone who'd learned the lesson firsthand. Then, quieter. "Is she going to be okay?" Emma looked up, surprised by the question. "We're trying, but some days they're harder than others." He didn't press her. He returned to his seat and picked up his fork. "Thank you for taking care of dinner anyway." The rest of the meal passed mostly in silence. Alex had chosen to sit at the small kitchen table, a spontaneous decision he couldn't quite explain. It wasn't his habit. He never dined with staff, but something kept him there. Maybe it was the way Emma had blinked fast, trying not to cry after the glass broke, or the quiet way she wiped everything clean, the steady rhythm she returned to, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Whatever it was, it mattered more in that moment than anything waiting for him in the office. When Emma got up to clear the dishes, he stayed seated. "Your sister, she lives with you?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, since our grandma passed. It's been a while." He tilted his head. "And you take care of her on your own?" "Always have." Her voice held no bitterness, only truth. Until recently, Emma and Alex had barely spoken. When she first arrived at the estate, she received instructions from a manager who showed her the kitchen, the pantry, and a printed list of planned meals. At the time, Alex Smith had seemed like just a name on a mailbox. But when she saw him, standing in the doorway that first day while she sang and washed dishes, everything shifted. And now, that evening, they sat at the same table, sharing food and glances she couldn't quite name. Emma knew this growing closeness was strange, but she also knew some connections defy logic, and sometimes they're impossible to avoid. Before leaving the house that night, Emma prepared a small meal for Elodie, waited until her sister calmed down, and walked her to the bus stop. She seemed quieter, and the distant look from earlier had given way to a kind of heavy stillness. Emma called it a middle day. Not good, not bad, just lived. She returned to the estate to finish her shift and prep the kitchen for the next day, already suspecting that her temporary stay might last a bit longer than expected. The next morning, Emma arrived at her usual time. The previous day still lingered in her mind, with its broken rhythms and quiet moments. She started by washing the dishes left in the sink, then checked the pantry and laid out the ingredients she'd need later. As she passed through the living room carrying a tray, something caught her eye, an envelope on the side table. Inside were a few folded bills and a small handwritten note. For the tart, and for yesterday. It was from Alex. She stared at the paper for several seconds, unsure how to feel. She thought about giving it back, but she understood the gesture. It wasn't charity. It was acknowledgement, maybe even an attempt at something else. She tucked the envelope into her bag and took a deep breath before continuing. She still didn't know how long she'd be staying in that house, but for now, she was going to make each day count. The morning began with a steady rhythm. Emma arrived early, just like the days before, and found the house wrapped in quiet. She set up breakfast, then headed down to the pantry to check the inventory. Her footsteps no longer echoed like those of an outsider. There was no stiffness in how she moved through the space, but she still carried a certain carefulness. Each new day, She tried to figure out just how far she could go without overstepping. It was a fine line, but it was becoming easier to see. Alex took his breakfast in the office, reading reports and answering calls well before 9. Emma simply left the tray on the small side table and quietly picked up the one from the night before. No words were exchanged during those moments, but a kind of rhythm was taking shape between them, quiet, nearly invisible. Even without conversation, it was clear he now saw her as part of that space. Around 11, the doorbell rang. Since no one else seemed to be home, and she knew the rest of the staff wouldn't arrive until later, Emma dried her hands on her apron and headed for the front. She opened the door with the kind of formality the house seemed to require, and found a man in a dark blazer, his hair carefully styled, a leather briefcase clutched in one hand. "Jackson Carroll, business partner of Mr. Smith," he announced before she could say a word. "Mr. Smith is in a meeting," she replied. "If you'd like to wait." He stepped inside without hesitation, like someone who already knew the layout. His eyes wandered around the room, scanning the decor with deliberate interest. "You're new here?" he asked while removing his glasses. "Just filling in temporarily," she replied. "You're the chef?" She nodded. He didn't press further. A few moments later, Alex came down the stairs, phone in hand, gave Emma a brief nod, and led the visitor into the office. The door closed and their voices softened behind it, though the clipped tone of the conversation still reached her. Early in the afternoon, Emma was rinsing herbs at the sink when Alex entered the kitchen, alone this time. His sleeves were rolled up, and he looked a bit worn around the edges. "Got any coffee?" She already knew how he liked it, strong, black, no questions. She made a fresh cup and handed it to him, which he accepted with a simple nod. But he didn't leave. He stood there for a few moments, staring at the stone floor, like he was turning something over in his mind. "Have you ever been somewhere that wasn't yours, but you stayed anyway?" The question came out of nowhere. Emma paused, knife still in hand, and looked up. Yes. He didn't ask for details, and she didn't offer any. It was as if they both understood what the question meant in their own way. Alex thanked her for the coffee and walked off slowly, carrying a full cup and a silence that felt a little lighter than usual. Later that day, Emma used the break between dinner and cleanup to call Elodie. Her sister's voice was steadier. "Today was better," she said. "I cleaned out a few things from the closet, even made myself something to eat." Emma smiled, relief easing the tension in her shoulders. "I'm glad. Call me any time, even if you've got nothing to say." Elodie murmured something in agreement, then asked, "Is Alex difficult?" "He's not simple, but he's not unkind," Emma replied. The call lasted just 5 minutes, but it was enough to make Emma feel like she could breathe again. She returned to the kitchen, feeling a little less torn. Dinner was prepared calmly, a light recipe with roasted vegetables, steamed fish, and a lemon sauce. She served it as usual, not expecting any comments. Before leaving for the evening, Emma passed through the dining room to turn off the lights. She found Alex still seated there, staring at an empty teacup. She stepped closer to clear the dishes, and he looked up for a moment. "Dinner was good," he said, his voice carrying both gratitude and fatigue. Emma gave a slight nod. Compliments from him were rare. As she turned to leave, she heard his voice again, softer this time. "Thank you for staying." She paused for a second, but didn't look back. She finished tidying up, turned off the lights, and left the house without a word. Emma arrived a little earlier than usual that morning. The sky was still grey, and a light rain tapped gently against the roof as she walked up to the front gate. The house was still closed, but the lights in the library were on, which meant Alex was already awake. She entered through the side entrance, her usual way in, and went straight to the kitchen. She tied her apron, washed her hands, and began working on the first batch of bread. It was something she liked to do when the Day started gloomy. The warmth from the oven helped settle her thoughts. While the dough rested, she took a few minutes to transfer the spices into new jars, a small improvement she'd suggested the day before. Alex hadn't shown up yet, but she could hear his footsteps around the house. Every now and then, he'd pass by the hallway and pause briefly, like he had something to say but decided to keep it to himself. A little after 9, he appeared at the kitchen door. He wasn't wearing his usual blazer, and his hair was still damp. His phone rested in one hand. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. She turned, holding a wooden spoon, and he nodded toward the hallway. In the office, Emma dried her hands and followed him. In the dimly lit room, with its dark walls and antique furniture, he motioned for her to take the chair across from the desk, but remained standing. "It's about your position," he began. "I've already informed the agency. You'll be staying here indefinitely." She nodded once without interrupting. "If you need anything, speak to me directly. I don't like going through others." His tone was formal, but underneath it was clear he was trying to be deliberate. Still, there was something else in the room, something he hadn't said. Emma thanked him and stood to leave, but he added, "Your cooking makes the day better." She didn't reply, just gave him a quiet smile and went back to the kitchen. Later that afternoon, Elodie called. Her voice was lighter, and she shared that she had picked up painting again. "I pulled out an old canvas and decided to finish it," she said. Emma sat on the small back step that led to the herb garden, listening with quiet focus. "Maybe I'll start taking commissions again," Elodie continued. "One at a time. No rush." Emma agreed it sounded like a good idea. They talked for several minutes, and when the call ended, she felt a kind of peace settle in, even if it wasn't certain how long it would last. Life was beginning to rearrange itself. She went back inside and started on dinner. A soft tune played from the radio as she chopped vegetables, and she sang along without thinking. She didn't notice Alex standing quietly at the kitchen door, watching her for a few moments before turning away without a word. That night, after everything was clean and put away, Emma was heading upstairs with a dry cloth in her hand when she heard footsteps coming from the hallway. She turned the corner and found Alex leaning against the wall, a cup of tea in his hand. "The music was nice today," he said casually. She stopped. "You heard it?" He nodded. "It was your voice that caught my attention." She didn't know what to say. There was nothing to explain, no excuse to give. "I hope it didn't bother you." "It didn't." His reply came quickly, almost like he was afraid she'd retreat. They stood there for a few seconds in the hallway, saying nothing more. Then he walked away, and she stayed where she was, her hand still resting on the banister, trying to figure out what exactly had just passed between them. The next morning brought something different. A service van pulled up in front of the house, and 2 delivery workers began unloading boxes of new kitchen equipment. Emma was asked to sign for the delivery. Among the items were professional-grade pans, a pepper mill, and a cutting board made of treated wood. There was also a brand-new apron, still folded neatly, with her initials embroidered in small, elegant letters. The delivery man explained that the order had been placed in the name of the estate, but the items were marked for exclusive use by the chef. She didn't say anything, just signed and put everything away with care. She didn't mention it to Alex, and he didn't bring it up either. But later, as he passed her in the hallway, his eyes paused for a second on the apron hanging nearby, then he kept walking. And Emma understood that some changes don't come in words, they come in gestures. At the end of the day, just as she was closing the fridge, Emma felt her phone buzz in her pocket. It was a message from Elodie, with a photo of a sketch in progress. Underneath, the caption read, "Productive day." Emma replied with a heart emoji and slipped the phone back into her pocket. Moments later, Alex appeared, heading toward the office. When he saw her, he stopped. "Everything ready for tomorrow?" She nodded. "The menu's already set." "Good," he said before continuing on. His presence no longer felt disruptive. It had become part of the rhythm, just like her own. Steps echoing through the house. A new balance was settling in, still delicate, still unnamed, but real. The morning began with the scent of dough rising in the oven and the soft sound of Emma's voice filling the kitchen. She sang quietly, like she always had since she was a child, barely aware she was doing it. Old songs, passed down from her grandmother, resurfaced naturally while she washed vegetables, simmered broths, or whipped egg whites into peaks. That morning, she was making a simple yogurt cake with lemon zest and honey, humming the chorus softly when Alex appeared in the doorway holding a cup of coffee. He stood there for a few seconds, watching her unnoticed at first, only when he cleared his throat and said with a faint smile, "That's a pretty song," did she turn around, a little flustered. "Sorry. I sometimes forget other people and can hear me." He replied that he didn't mind. In fact, he liked it. And after a quiet pause, he added, "I think I already told you. I like it. Makes the house feel alive." He fell silent again, but didn't leave. Instead, he took a seat on a stool nearby and stayed long enough for Emma to start wondering if the moment was just casual, or if he genuinely wanted to be there. While preparing lunch, Emma kept her focus on the ingredients, but she could still feel him nearby. She was making a warm lentil salad with roasted vegetables, something he had complimented once before, and had decided to make again, without asking if he still liked it. Alex only spoke when the aroma filled the room. "This, the one with the fresh thyme?" he asked, stepping closer to the counter. She nodded slightly, her hands steady despite his proximity. He had been close before, but something felt different that day. The way he leaned against the counter, the way his eyes followed her movements, it didn't feel like a simple evaluation of her work. There was a curiosity that had nothing to do with spices. She served a small tasting portion like she always did to test the flavors and handed it to him. He took it silently, chewed slowly, then smiled without exaggeration. "It's perfect." Just 2 words, but the way he looked at her afterward made her hyper-aware of how she was holding the spoon. Later that afternoon, Emma was called to the office by Mrs. Charrier, the estate's house manager. The conversation was straightforward. Emma would have the next 2 days off, part of the regular rotation among staff. She found the timing odd, but didn't question it. She thanked her, removed her apron, and headed home. When she arrived, Elodie was asleep on the couch, half a bowl of cereal beside her, and a book open in her lap. Her face looked more peaceful than it had in weeks. Emma gently draped a light blanket over her before heading to take a shower. The break would be useful. She had laundry to catch up on, bills to sort, and medical paperwork for her sister she still hadn't submitted to the clinic. That evening, as she sat down to eat a simple plate of garlic and oil pasta, she found herself thinking about Alex. Not the stern boss or the distant man she met that first day, but the one who sat in the kitchen without rushing, who listened to her voice without judgment, and said it made the house feel alive. It was an unexpected compliment, one that lingered. The next day, there was no contact. Emma used the time to clean up the apartment and go through some of Elodie's old things that were taking up space. When she stepped out to pick up bread and fruit from the local market, she noticed one of the estate's drivers parked near the building. He greeted her with a friendly nod and said he was making a delivery. Emma responded with a polite wave and continued on, not asking questions. Still, she felt oddly tethered to that house, as if part of her routine had been placed on pause. Late that afternoon, she cooked again out of habit, a sweet potato and caramelized onion stew. It didn't match the warm weather, but it tasted like a good memory. As she stirred the pot, she began to sing once more, unconsciously. Somewhere in the middle of the song, she wondered whether Alex could still hear it, or if he'd ever truly noticed. But by then, the thought had already arrived. It was too late to stop it. When she returned to work, the kitchen was spotless, but unusually quiet. The housekeeper informed her that Alex had left early for meetings and would be dining alone that evening. No guests, no special requests. Emma chose to prepare something light and comforting, a creamy leek soup with herb croutons and a small cheese and mushroom quiche. When he arrived, he greeted her with a simple "good evening." He ran a hand through his hair, looking tired, and asked what was for dinner. She answered in a neutral tone, trying not to read too much into it. But instead of going straight to his room or the office, he sat down on one of the high kitchen stools and stayed there as she finished setting up the plates. "Did you miss this place?" he asked with a faint smile. Emma froze for a second, surprised he'd noticed. "A little," she said. He didn't say anything else, but he lingered a while longer, quiet, while the soup steamed gently and the smell of herbs filled the room. After dinner, Emma was washing the dishes when Alex came back, jacket off and sleeves rolled up. He leaned casually against the counter, beside the sink, and said the food had been especially good that evening. She thanked him with a small smile and kept rinsing the pots. He didn't leave right away. Instead, he picked up a kitchen towel and began drying the silverware without a word. The gesture caught her off guard. It wasn't something he usually did, not part of any routine they'd shared, but she didn't stop him. They spent the next few minutes finishing the cleanup together in silence, their conversation limited to the occasional glance and a few half-formed phrases. When they were done, he set the towel down, gave her a slight nod, and walked away. Emma turned off the faucet, put away the last plate, and stood still for a moment, alone in the kitchen. It was hard to define exactly what had changed, but something in the air felt different, as if, just for today, the kitchen had been more than a place to work. Saturday began slower than usual. The estate was still asleep when Emma came through the side entrance and set her bag on the kitchen shelf. She was tying on her apron when she noticed a vase of fresh flowers on the center counter. It wasn't a place where flowers were normally left. That area was purely functional, meant for prep and nothing else. But there they were, freshly arranged, droplets of water still clinging to the stems. She stepped closer. Lavender and small white peonies. Next to them, a handwritten note, "To soften the start of your day." No signature, but she recognized Alex's handwriting. She didn't mention it to anyone, just quietly changed the breakfast plan. Instead of the usual bread and coffee, she made delicate crepes, fresh fruit, and a warm apple cinnamon compote. When Alex came in, already dressed for the day, he looked at the table, then at the flowers, and smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile. But it lingered a second longer than necessary. Emma poured the coffee, adjusted the napkin beside his. Plate then returned to the main kitchen. Alex didn't comment right away, but after finishing the meal, he passed by the door and said, "The crepes were excellent." She thanked him, but couldn't hide the faint blush on her cheeks. Her back was turned, wiping down the counter, but he seemed to notice. He paused for a moment, like he might say something else, then simply added, "Have a good day." His voice lacked the usual formality. There was a softness in his tone, a more relaxed rhythm. When he left, Emma glanced back at the flowers and realized she was smiling to herself. She returned to her tasks with a lighter touch, humming without thinking, washing, chopping, seasoning. The kitchen felt different, not because of how it looked, but because of what had been left there, and it wasn't just the bouquet. Shortly after, the house welcomed guests. A couple of Alex's friends had called ahead about coming for lunch, and Emma had been asked to prepare something simple, but elegant. She chose a lamb roast with Provençal vegetables, a salad of bitter greens, and a rustic fruit and nut cake. As she worked, Alex passed through the kitchen a few times. He didn't ask for anything, just watched. At one point, he stood near the door and asked, "Do you always cook like this, singing?" She nodded, not turning around. "It's the only way I know how." He smiled. "Then don't stop. It works." She heard his footsteps retreat down the hall and stood still for a few seconds, wooden spoon in hand, pot open, needing that pause to absorb the moment. She resumed cooking, but the comment lingered. His question hadn't been about the singing, it had been about her. Lunch was served on the back veranda. Emma stayed in the kitchen with the other staff, but she could hear the laughter and friendly voices coming from the garden. When everything was cleared, she passed through the living room to check for any stray glasses or plates. She found a wine glass left on a side table and went to retrieve it. As she turned, she found herself face to face with Alex, who had returned to grab a jacket. The moment was brief, but he paused. The lamb was perfect. Our guests had nothing but praise. Emma thanked him, unsure what to do with her hands. He stepped closer and handed her a napkin that had fallen to the floor. Their fingers brushed for a second. She murmured a thank you and left the room quickly, his voice still echoing in her mind. It was the first time their touch hadn't felt incidental. There was something subtle in it, something new. Later in the afternoon, once the house had settled back into its usual quiet, Emma decided to reorganize the upper pantry shelves. She climbed onto a step stool to reach some older jars when she heard footsteps approaching. It was Alex. His sleeves were rolled up, and he was holding a mug of tea. "You really shouldn't be doing that alone," he said, when he saw her balancing at the top. She told him it was under control, but just then, one of the jars slipped. It didn't fall, she caught it, but she lost her balance slightly. That was enough for Alex to step forward and grip the base of the stool, steadying it. She looked down, surprised. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes." Her voice came out softer than she intended. He waited until she climbed down and still kept his hand on the stool for a moment longer. When she stepped away, he let go and said with a half smile, "If you're planning to rearrange the whole house, at least let me bring a real ladder next time." That evening at home, Emma told Elodie about the busy day, the compliments, the guests. Her sister reacted with mild interest, but her face lit up when she heard about the flowers in the kitchen. "So he's starting to notice," she said. Emma shook her head, trying not to look affected, but deep down she knew something had changed. It wasn't just attention, it was consistency. He was around more often. He spoke with less urgency. He lingered. And even though he hadn't said anything that could be taken as clear interest, the way he kept showing up was enough to stir something in her, something that hadn't been there before. That night, as she lay in bed, Emma thought about everything that had happened. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, but in the details she was beginning to understand. Alex was there, and slowly she was starting to like the idea. The Monday following that full Saturday, the house seemed to be holding its breath. There were no visitors expected, no out-of-the-ordinary plans. Emma arrived earlier than she needed to. She hadn't slept well, and after tossing in bed for hours, decided it was better to start the day at the estate than stay home trying to focus. The overcast sky gave the mansion's rooms a cooler tone, and the soft sound of rain against the windows turned the kitchen into something close to a retreat. She tied her apron, pulled her hair back, and began chopping ingredients on instinct, hands moving automatically. Her mind kept drifting to that brief moment with Alex, his hand on the step stool, the way he didn't pull back right away, the light brush of fingers, the note with the flowers, the way he had asked if she missed being there. It wasn't just about what he said. It was what he allowed to linger in the silence afterward. She had just begun to organize the counter when she heard the upstairs shower cut off. Moments later, steady footsteps moved down the hallway. It was early for him to be up, and she wondered if something had pulled him out of sleep. Alex appeared in the kitchen not long after, his hair still damp, wearing a more casual shirt than usual. He was barefoot. He took a seat on one of the high stools without saying a word. He just watched her for a while, watched her hands stir. A wooden spoon watched her back as she reached for a baking dish. She slid a small bowl of roasted butternut squash and sage soup across the counter toward him. He took it without hesitation, tasted it slowly, and after a quiet pause, said, "Warms you from the inside." She kept stirring the pot, didn't respond, but a soft smile pulled at the corners of her lips. Later that afternoon, Emma took advantage of a break in the weather to walk to the local market for fresh herbs. Alex stayed in the library. When she returned, pants damp at the hem, the wicker basket tucked under one arm, she found the front door ajar. She nudged it open quietly and stepped inside, as she always did. But something about the sound of the latch seemed louder than it should have been that day. She headed straight to the kitchen, trimmed the herbs into jars of water, washed a few dishes that had gathered, and returned to the dessert she'd started earlier, a lemon cream with oat crumble. She was just finishing the final touches when she heard his voice from the hallway. "I sometimes wonder what this house would feel like if you hadn't stayed." The words came without context, but carried their own weight. Alex was standing in the doorway. He didn't step forward, just watched. Emma set the spoon on the counter and turned slowly. Maybe it would have gone back to how it was before. He shook his head. "No, I think it would have felt empty, even if no one could have pointed out why." Later in the day, the housekeeper came in with unexpected news. An old couple, longtime friends of Alex, had confirmed dinner for the following evening. Only 4 guests total, including the host. But everything needed to be perfect, Emma noted. The instructions, quietly planning the menu in her head. Alex didn't give direct orders, but he passed through the kitchen more than once that evening. One time he mentioned, "Mrs. Roche loves dishes with warm spices. Her husband doesn't eat red meat." A detail Emma hadn't known. She stored it mentally without asking questions. Another time, he stopped by again, glass of water in hand, and asked, "Do you need anything for tomorrow?" She said everything was under control. "Even so, if something's missing, just tell me. I'd rather you didn't waste energy on what you don't have to." The way he said it, direct, but without any authority in his tone, made it clear he wasn't just talking about ingredients. He was talking about care, about allowing her to be in that space without needing to constantly explain why. The next morning, Emma arrived with a plan. She split her time between preparing dinner and fine-tuning the dining room. She chose neutral tones, delicate china, and flowers from the back garden arranged in a simple vase. Alex appeared shortly before noon, quietly observing everything, without comment at first. Then, "I don't think I've ever seen this room look that good," he said, glancing around. "Miss Charrier keeps the house in great shape, but you bring something different." Emma wasn't sure how to respond. "Maybe it's just that I'm used to smaller homes. I learned how to make a lot with a little." He nodded. "That's exactly what I want here. I don't want this place to feel like a luxury hotel." She returned to the kitchen, his words repeating softly in her head. Alex wasn't a man who handed out compliments easily, and even when he did, it always sounded like he wasn't sure he should. But that day, there was something different in what he said, something she couldn't quite name, but it made her stir, slice, and season with more intention. That evening, after the guests had been served, Emma waited in the kitchen for her cue to bring out dessert. From the hallway, she could hear soft voices, the clinking of glasses, the gentle rhythm of silverware. When the conversation quieted, she rolled the dessert cart into the dining room. The two couples were still seated, laughing at something Alex had just said. When he saw her, he stood. "And here comes the chef of the evening." His tone was casual, almost familiar. He introduced her with only a few words, but with an ease that caught her by surprise. "This is Emma. She's the reason everything you tasted tonight exists." The blonde woman sitting to his right smiled and said she had never had such a light mushroom quiche. "Did you study culinary arts?" Emma shook her head. "I learned from my grandmother, and then on the job." The man next to her chuckled. "Well, better than most trained chefs. You got a gift." Emma thanked him, a little unsure under their attention. She collected the plates, served dessert, and walked back slowly, not in a rush. But before she crossed through the door, she glanced back. Alex was looking at her and smiling. When the kitchen was finally cleaned and the utensils put away, Emma was getting ready to leave when Alex appeared again. He was still in the same shirt from dinner, though the top two buttons were now undone. He looked more relaxed. "It was a good night," he said, "but only because you were here." She didn't answer right away. She was leaning against the counter, her bag slung over one shoulder. "I was just doing my job." "No, Emma, you did more than that." He stepped a little closer, not intrusively. "I've thought more than once about selling this place, starting over somewhere new." She watched him, unsure where he was going with it. "But lately, I'm not so sure anymore." The hallway was dim, and the kitchen clock showed it was nearly 11. She didn't say anything, just adjusted the strap on her bag and whispered, "Good night." He didn't stop her from leaving. He just stayed there, on the other side of the door, while she disappeared down the hallway. And for a long time, he didn't move, because he knew, even if he wasn't ready to admit it, that he wasn't the only one deciding the boundaries of that house anymore. The next morning dawned warmer, as if the weather had fallen in step with the slow shift happening inside the house. Emma arrived wearing a lighter blouse, her hair pulled back more loosely, and a strange calmness in her stride. It had long passed. The point where she could claim the house was unfamiliar. It was a place where her feet knew exactly where to go, where her hands found the right jars without needing to look, where her body recognized his nearness even before he entered the room. She walked through the main living area in silence and noticed on a side table a half-finished cup of coffee. Her brow furrowed slightly. Alex rarely left anything out of place. There was only one explanation. He'd been interrupted. In the kitchen, lunch was already mentally mapped out, but her thoughts refused to follow the usual sequence. Something had shifted since the previous evening. And it wasn't just the way he'd spoken about selling the house, it was how he said he'd given up on that idea. Because of her. Late that morning, Alex appeared with his hair still tousled from the breeze, wearing no jacket, a pale shirt, and loafers with no laces. He looked more relaxed than usual. He asked what was for lunch, but without urgency, just out of interest. Emma responded while taking the chicken out of the oven and brushing it with a mustard and honey glaze. "It'll be served with vegetable. Couscous and a mixed green salad with walnuts." He nodded, but instead of leaving, he pulled out one of the high stools and sat down. He watched as she chopped herbs and, without looking directly at her, said, "What I said yesterday about you being here, it wasn't just about work." She didn't react right away. She kept mincing the parsley carefully, as if that sentence might slip away if faced head-on. "I understood," she said eventually, her tone neutral but clear in meaning. There was no room for misunderstanding, but there was also no rush. He got up a few minutes later, saying he needed to make a few calls. But before stepping away, he turned to her. "You make me think about things I had locked away a long time ago." Then he left. Emma finished preparing lunch more slowly than usual, not out of distraction, but because her hands seemed to need more time to process each movement. When it was time to serve, she noticed Alex had chosen the smaller table on the back veranda, a place he rarely used. He was already seated, his laptop closed beside him, a glass of water in hand. When she arrived with the tray, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit with me?" There was no formality in the request, just a quiet desire to share the moment. Emma paused for only a second or two, then took the seat. She served the food with care, placed the bread in the center, and remained quiet. They ate like that for a while, with only the sound of the wind stirring the trees around them. Then he spoke. "I got used to absence. It felt easier, less dangerous." She didn't interrupt, "But I think I've missed out on a lot of things just because I was afraid of repeating mistakes. And now you show up, washing dishes and humming to yourself, and it throws everything off." She looked up at him, serious. "I didn't come here to disrupt anything." He shook his head. "I know, but you did anyway." That afternoon, Emma called her sister and shared only the essentials. She said things were going well, that the job no longer felt as temporary as it once had, that Alex had complimented her dishes, and yes, the atmosphere around the house had changed. Elodie didn't press for details. She simply mentioned she was working on a series of children's illustrations and thinking about presenting them to a small independent publisher she knew. Emma encouraged the idea, but soon after hung up and sat still for a while, staring out the tiny pantry window where the sky had already begun to darken. When she returned to the kitchen, there was a new box sitting on the counter. Inside it, a professional Japanese chef's knife with a dark blade and a polished wooden handle. No note, no explanation, but she knew exactly where it came from. She lifted the box gently, felt the weight of the knife in her hands, and placed it carefully. In the drawer she'd reorganized days earlier. She didn't mention it to anyone. But when she began preparing dinner, she used the new knife, and in every clean, decisive cut, she felt the quiet extension of something far beyond metal meeting wood. By the end of the day, the kitchen was spotless. The lights turned off, and Emma was about to leave when the rain began to hit the windows harder. She grabbed her bag and headed toward the side entrance. Her hand was already on the doorknob when she heard his voice behind her. "You're heading out like that?" She turned. He was holding out a coat. "At least take this. I don't want you caught in the rain." She stepped closer. "That's really not necessary. I'll be fine. But I want you to have it." She took the coat without protesting, slipped it on slowly, as if the act itself were a kind of silent embrace. He opened the door for her and held it for a moment without adding anything else. Their eyes were closer than they had ever been. "Good night," she said softly. "Good night, Emma." Her name, spoken just like that, without any practical reason, just because it belonged to her, lingered in the air long after the door. It closed. She walked down the front steps with his coat on her shoulders and a head so full of thoughts she barely felt the chill of the rain starting to fall harder around her. Emma had barely stepped onto the first stair of the side entrance when she heard Alex's footsteps behind her, firm, purposeful. The rain had picked up, and the coat he'd just lent her still held the warmth of his body. She clutched her purse to her chest, ready to make a run for the gate, but froze at the sound of his voice again, closer this time, less restrained. "Emma, wait." She turned slowly. Alex stood under the soft light of the doorway, his hair damp, his eyes more direct than ever before. He came down one step, then another, until he stood right in front of her. "You don't have to leave right now, not in this weather." She hesitated. "It's okay, Alex. I'll just catch the bus and—" "It's not about that. It's because I don't want you to go." His voice wasn't urgent, but there was a steady resolve to it, a kind of clarity that no longer asked for permission. "Stay, just for tonight. The guest room's ready. Clean sheets, warm blankets. Just one night, or however long you want." Her breathing quickened, not from the cold, but from what his words carried. It wasn't just an offer. It was something deeper. A line crossed carefully but unmistakably. She didn't respond with words, only met his gaze and stepped back inside, handing him her purse, which he took as naturally as he'd once held the base of the stepladder for her. They walked through the damp hallway together in silence, back toward the kitchen. The yellow light reflected off the puddles near the door. Emma kicked off her shoes, and he handed her a clean towel. Neither of them said anything about how strange. The moment was standing there, soaked, hearts laid bare, something irreversible about to happen. When she hung the coat on the wall hook and turned to thank him, Alex was already close enough that her scent mingled with the scent of rain. "You should know," he began, his voice low, his eyes steady on hers. "From the very first day, I knew it would be hard to let you go." She didn't step back. Her pulse echoed in her neck, in her hands, in every part of her body. The kiss happened right there, in front of the sink where she had so often sung to herself. Alex pulled her in by the waist, and Emma didn't resist. Their lips met with a longing that had been building for days. There was no hesitation, no rush, just a full surrender, silent and sure, with his hands at the small of her back, as if making certain she wouldn't slip away. Her whole body responded, welcoming, accepting. When they pulled apart, he kept her close, their faces almost touching, his breath warm against her chin. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this, but I can't pretend anymore." She cupped his face, her fingers still wet from the rain. "It's already happening. We were just pretending it wasn't." Alex brought her hand to his lips, kissed the back of it slowly, then led her through the hall. He showed her the downstairs guest room, a quiet space with white linens and the faint scent of lavender. He switched on the heater, unfolded the blanket draped over the armchair, and asked if she needed anything else. Emma just shook her head. "Just you still being here." He touched her face one more time, then left the room without closing the door all the way. When she lay down, still dressed, her thoughts came in waves filled with the taste of his kiss, the touch of his hands, and the sound of his voice saying he didn't want her to leave. The room wasn't hers. The house wasn't either. But that night, she belonged there, fully, without apology. The next morning, Emma woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall and the scent of coffee mixed with melted butter. Alex was in the kitchen, arranging a tray with 2 mugs and slices of fresh bread he had warmed in the oven. When he saw her at the doorway, hair loose, eyes still soft with sleep, he smiled. "Good morning." She returned the smile, quiet, but full of meaning. "Morning!" They ate together right there, sharing the hush of the early hour as if the rest of the world didn't exist. After breakfast, she helped organize the day's tasks. No one mentioned the night before, not with words, but the glances they shared, the way his hand rested on her shoulder when passing by. Those gestures spoke for everything. It wasn't until late in the afternoon that he finally said something, standing by the door with his travel bag beside him. "I have to take care of a few things out of town. 2 days, maybe 3, but the house is still yours." She didn't ask questions, didn't request details or a time of return. She already knew something between them had shifted for good. Alex stepped closer, kissed her forehead with his. Eyes closed and left without another word. The house fell quiet again, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It was the quiet that remains after a kiss, after a touch, after you've been chosen. 3 days had passed. Before the clock even struck 8, Emma was already in the kitchen, apron tied snugly, her hands covered in the scent of rising dough. The house was still, quieter than usual, with the full staff only expected later in the morning and Alex still away. Being alone like that was rare, and perhaps for that reason, she took the opportunity to prepare recipes that called for time, precision, and patience. There was no rush. She had slept through the night, yet had woken with a strange knot inside her chest. Not quite longing, not quite anxiety, something harder to name. She was kneading the brioche slowly, focused on the texture, when the air behind her shifted. A presence, real, unmistakable. And then, arms wrapped around her waist. She didn't have time to turn around. Alex held her from behind, firm but gentle, and before a word was said, he kissed her neck slowly. His lips were cool from the morning air. The scent of him, the feel of his skin against hers, the way his body filled the space around her, it all arrived at once, overwhelming and undeniable. Emma closed her eyes. Only when his lips reached the curve of her jaw did she turn. And he pulled her closer, kissing her mouth with the kind of hunger that doesn't come from absence alone. It comes from days spent holding back. The kiss was warm, deep, urgent, without being rushed. Like everything they hadn't yet said was stored. There, between them, when they finally paused, he didn't let go. His arms still circled her, and he looked at her with a calm that masked nothing. "I don't want to go that long without kissing you again," he said. Her smile started in her eyes. "You showed up without warning. Because I knew you'd be here." He touched his forehead to hers. "I thought about you every day, every night." She ran her hand through his hair, still carrying the morning breeze. "I thought about you too, but I figured you needed space." "What I needed was you." There was no hesitation in his voice, and none in her response. He didn't step back, just softened the hold, keeping her close as if reluctant to let any part of her go. Emma pushed a few strands of hair behind her ear, her skin flushed, her lips still tingling. "Are you hungry?" she asked, almost out of habit. "Only if it's for your brioche," he replied. She pointed to the dough resting near the window, still rising. "It'll take a while." "I'll wait," he said, sitting on the stool with his shirt half unbuttoned, watching her every move. They had coffee together in that soft kitchen light, sharing slices of buttered bread in quiet harmony. He spoke briefly about the trip, said it had been productive but left him feeling empty. "What good is space," he asked, "if you come home and everything feels hollow?" Emma looked up from her cup. "It's not hollow anymore, Alex." And he knew she wasn't talking about the house. He stayed the rest of the day, skipped his office, told the team not to come in. "There's time for everything," he said. "Today is yours." They walked through the garden, picking herbs for lunch, laughing over little things. At one point, as Emma leaned to grab time, he came up behind her and placed his hand gently on her back. She stood slowly, her hair falling over her shoulders, and he stayed right there, eyes fixed on her face as the morning sun danced across it. No words were needed. The decision for the rest of the day had already been made. They cooked together. He washed, she chopped. He tasted, she adjusted. After lunch, they sat at the table, side by side, until the light began to shift across the wooden floor. "Later," he asked her out. "Just us. Tonight." The words weren't a question, they were a declaration. Emma nodded and went upstairs to change. When she came back down, Alex was already waiting in the car, fingers drumming on the steering wheel. They drove into town, wandered through old streets, browsed tucked-away bookstores and cafes. They stopped at a shop window, displaying handmade glass and delicate jewelry. Alex went in first. As Emma admired a row of vintage perfume bottles, he chose a necklace, an oval pendant of pale stone, set on a thin silver chain. Simple, unpretentious, perfect. He gave her the box outside. "Saw this and thought of you." She opened it carefully, touched the pendant, and smiled without words. "Thank you." He kissed her chin lightly. "Just wanted you to know you've been on my mind." Dinner was in a small riverside restaurant. They ordered wine, laughed over small memories, exchanged glances that spoke more than any dialogue could. There was no hesitation between them anymore. Their desire was no longer hidden, but it wasn't hurried either. They returned around 9. The night had turned cooler. Alex parked slowly by the side garage. Inside, Emma kicked off her shoes, dropped her purse on a chair. He went to the bedroom and came back in a few minutes, now without the jacket, his shirt half open. He stood in front of her without saying anything. "Want some tea?" she asked gently. "No, I want you." The words weren't forceful, but they were true. She moved toward him, placed her hands on his face, and kissed him again, slow, deep. His hand slid up her back, resting at the base of her neck. Nothing else needed to be said. They walked together to his room. The lighting was soft, the bed dressed in pale sheets that seemed to welcome them. He took off his shirt. She unfastened her dress, each item laid aside carefully, like shedding. Past fears, he eased her down into the bed, his body finding hers with quiet certainty. Nothing about it was rushed. When they finally joined, Emma closed her eyes and let everything go. Their love didn't begin in that moment, but something changed. It deepened. It became real. Afterward, there was no awkward silence. Just steady breaths, warm skin, hands interlaced, and the calm certainty that this was where they belonged. The following weeks reshaped their lives without drama. There were no announcements, no declarations, just presence. Alex wasn't gone as often, and when he was, he told her first, not out of obligation, but respect. Emma continued her kitchen work on weekdays, but weekends were different. She stopped. Wearing her apron, she stayed at the house, not as a guest, but as someone whose place was acknowledged. The housekeeper caught on quickly, noticing the way he said her name. The staff adjusted quietly. No one asked if she'd be dining with them. Everyone knew she'd be with him. Sundays became their sacred time. Walks along the river, shopping at local markets, meals prepared side by side, books shared on the back porch. He'd bring her favorite wine. She'd tuck a novel in her bag for him. They weren't performing, they were simply living. When her sister Elodie had her first gallery showing, Emma brought Alex. He walked through each piece with real attention. And when Elodie approached to thank him, he simply said, "No need, you're incredibly talented." That was all. And it was enough. Emma held his hand a little tighter that night. A month later, they sat together in the back garden, the sky cloudless. Alex held her hand. "I don't want you coming and going. I want you to stay, not in the kitchen, in the house, with me." Emma didn't answer right away. She looked at the garden she'd helped care for, the rooms that now carried pieces of her. "I want to, but I have responsibilities. My sister, the house." He brought her hand to his lips. "Let me take care of that." She didn't reply with words. She rested her head on his shoulder and stayed there for a while, letting the warmth of the setting sun settle over her. It was more than a request. It was the first time someone saw her not as a temporary comfort, but as someone worth keeping. And a few nights later, without ceremony, as she washed dishes and he dried them beside her, she said, "About what you asked. If you still want that, I'll say yes." He didn't need to ask what she meant. He just smiled with his eyes and pulled her in by the waist, like starting a slow dance Elodie knew before Emma even told her. Not because of the missing bags, but because something had changed in her expression. "You have the right to live what you want," her sister said one morning, brushing her hair as Emma poured coffee. "Just don't forget this house is still yours too." Emma kissed her on the forehead. "I'll never forget, and I'll always come back." She trained a new cook, hand-wrote recipes, marked her visit days, bringing flowers, fruit, and what Alex now called Emma's flavor. The shift in the mansion was quiet, but unmistakable. A small suitcase first, then books, a toothbrush, a jacket hanging beside his. The housekeeper reorganized the closets. The gardener started asking her what herbs to replant. In the last scene, from that chapter of their life, it was Alex waiting for her, A Sunday morning, coffee already brewed, porch doors open to a cloudless sky. Emma came in with tousled hair, wearing one of his shirts, bare feet against the floor. She sat in his lap and leaned her head on his chest without saying a word. And after a while, he whispered, "I love you." She looked at him, smiled, and answered, "I love you too." No promises, no speeches, just love spoken quietly. And there they stayed. The end. So what did you think of this story? Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new video. See you next time.